But I wanted to share a few remarks today, just connecting to why we're all in DC today, what this moment is. And I want to start with something here that probably, I would say I have not actually ever put in a speech before. So this will be an interesting background for you all. Anne hurried into the courtroom. At first, there was a loud shuffling of papers. Everyone sat down. A long silence fell over the room. Please listen carefully to all that we said and decide among yourselves whether abortion should be allowed in the U.S. When I was in 6th grade, I penned those words as part of a fictional story where Anne, a post-abortive woman, was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and she was deciding the fate of legalized abortion in America as she wrestled with personal regret. In my story, written in 1989, which I still have today, which is kind of amazing, I just found it last year, written in 1989, this fictional character became a Supreme Court judge. Get this, March 8, 2021. I have no idea how I picked that year. That's what I didn't even remember that until I reread it last night, putting this together. Now, I will say what I did put in there was she actually heard this case 10 years later. So, interestingly enough, our timeline, the moment we're in, is actually thankfully ahead of this fictional timeline that I had in this story, and I'm thrilled that I was wrong, and I hope that we will see the reversal 10 years in front of this fictional story. But, you know, abortion was the human rights tragedy of that day, and it remains the human rights tragedy of today. And today, outside the Dobbs case, that exact moment is why I've been at the Family Foundation for 21 years. It is exactly to be a part of this moment that we are in. That story, and actually a speech that was given by my friend Susan in 6th grade, was a persuasive speech, and she did a speech on why abortion is still wrong in the case of rape and incest. Those two things were the beginning of God's call on my life to engage on this life issue. It's funny, when I meet people for the first time and they're unfamiliar with me or the Family Foundation, they'll say things like, you know, so how did you decide to get into this job with 4 kids? And I'll look at them and kind of go, no, that would actually be insane. You wouldn't actually voluntarily do that. But I tell them I've been doing this job long before I had children, and God just hasn't released me from this call. And it is this life call that I have been on my whole entire journey. And I knew even in 1990 that at least some of why God had put me on this earth was to engage this battle. If you've ever watched Chariots of Fire, you know, in that story of Eric Liddell, you know, where he says, God made me to be fast. When I run, I feel His pleasure. That's the way it is for me when I get to work on things related to protecting the unborn. When I was young, I was pro-life by faith, right? He knit me together in my mother's womb, you know, John leaving for joy in Elizabeth's womb. That was why I was pro-life. When I went to high school and learned biology and DNA, I became pro-life because of science. You know those signs that say trust science? I actually did trust science. Yeah. You know, we actually do trust science. You know, I laugh at the other side that, you know, you can't help but marvel at the process of human development. And if you don't, you're missing something really amazing. And then I tell people, but when I had my first child, I became pro-life by experience, right? I mean, you just see that unbelievably small child on an ultrasound and hear the heartbeat, and you can't help but be absolutely amazed. And then, of course, my actual first child was an ectopic pregnancy, so I then became pro-life through grief, right? You lose your first child. That is no less a child, and you know that by your life experience. So fast forward a few years to this moment that we're in, and I tell people, you know, it's one thing for our generation to be pro-life, but my children can't help but be pro-life. They have literally seen themselves on screen. We literally did a color live ultrasound that was recorded, right? So they have a DVD, which eventually they'll be like, what's a DVD? But I'll get it, you know, I'll get it. But they literally can see themselves in the womb. How can you not be pro-life when you can see what you looked like before you were born, and then you can look at the day you were born and you go, what was the difference? You know, and so it's really remarkable. So today, as we acknowledge, you know, that these images weren't available when Roe was decided, we know that science wasn't showing us everything that we now know. Technology wasn't there yet. And that is when the Supreme Court wrongly decided that abortion has to be tolerated in all 50 states. In that moment, they failed to err on the side of protecting life. They overruled states that wisely recognized the central and primary role of the law, which is to maintain everyone's right to life. I say they defied the wise words of Dr. Seuss, person to person, no matter how small. And in Virginia, we have been working to create a day when abortion is not only rejected in law, but rejected in the human heart, right? It's all of the above that has to happen. And each of you have been a critical part of our work to do that. You have been the faithful supporters as we have had our, as you know, ups and downs in the public policy battle over human life. And for some of you, let me share a bit of history, because some of you are not lifelong Virginians and maybe didn't follow every speck of sort of our pro-life history here in Virginia. But Roe became the law of the land, 1973. Shortly thereafter, Virginia immediately pretty much said, okay, if we're going to have abortion legal, it's at least going to be a doctor that does the abortion. 1975 is when that law went into place. They at least said, okay, let's put some minimal standards around this. Okay, so then fast forward decades later, you get Governor Allen, and we finally get parental notification, hard fought, over a decade of battle to get parental notification for abortion. And then the early 2000s come, right? And in Virginia, we finally began to give women true informed consent, where we showed them pictures, gestational ages of their unborn child, so they could make a more informed decision. And we then started requiring 24-hour waiting periods to say, look, we don't want a woman forced into this, pressured into this, makes a bad decision in a hurry. I mean, timeshares, for heaven's sakes, have like, 3-5 days, right? So we did these things to say, okay, this might be legal, but let's at least make sure we're giving women everything they can. And then we actually got to the point where we said we've got to have parental consent for abortion for minors, that a child needs their parent totally involved in this decision that they're making. So then you fast forward through the years of Governor Warner, right, and the years of I'm personally pro-life Governor Kane, but I still do everything possible to advance abortion. We had a lot of those years which were incredibly frustrating. And then we got to the McDonnell administration, where we finally got to start making some traction again on the matter of life. So one critical law that changed the landscape of abortion was a bill that you probably heard about, not just in the news, but unfortunately mocked on late night comedy shows, which was our window to the womb bill. This was the idea that, and it was totally mischaracterized by Rachel Maddow and all the others, but it was this idea, simple concept really, that when abortion is done, the abortionist does an ultrasound. It's a safety thing. You do one to know where you are before you do that. He should offer it to the mom-to-be. She should be allowed to see her own ultrasound, which of course we see all of our medical records. You have access to your blood tests but somehow with the issue of abortion, we've decided that we're going to deprive women of their own medical information. So it was simply, we're going to allow her to have a window to the womb if she wants it. And we were really excited, and this was the part of the bill that people didn't even really know about, but we were really excited because it allowed us to have the Department of Health at that point list on their website everywhere you could go to get a free ultrasound. Well, guess where that was? All of our friends in the Pregnancy Resource Center. So we literally could drive these women to the place where they're going to get the best care and they're going to get to make the best decision. And it was also during the McDonnell administration that we finally restored safety standards to abortion. We had some in the early 80s that got stripped off based on politics, and we finally got to put some of those back. The General Assembly passed a law requiring the standards and actually charged the governor's staff, which may or may not have been my husband at the time, and I'm extremely proud of what he did. But they got to create a set of emergency regulations, and then it turned over to the Board of Health to set these final safety standards for our facilities. And then, of course, so McDonnell administration, we got some good stuff going. Then we get to the Governor Mccullough years, which thankfully we will not be repeating. Anybody have years where he, if you remember, he said, I will be, and he said it during this campaign again, I will be a brick wall for reproductive rights. And I have to sidebar here because one of the greatest compliments we've ever had at the Family Foundation was when he said, and Victoria Cobb is the sledgehammer, that tries to break down the wall. And of course he's saying that, and we say this a lot, but he's saying that as a representation of all of you. What we do is absolutely to break down this idea that he's going to just, not allow the pro-life laws to advance. And so it was a tremendous compliment. But so we had those years, and he basically constructed a new Board of Health, and their goal was to deconstruct the safety standards. At the Family Foundation, even before we had Founding Freedoms Law Center with Josh Hetzler in the back there that heads that up, we were thrilled to take that administration to court because we proved that they violated the law, and actually we got to ensure that those safety standards stayed in place because they could have legally taken apart those safety standards. They were so zealous for the cause, they actually didn't even follow the law in the process of destroying the safety standards. So, so we had some fun legal battles there, right? So then we get Governor Northam, right? So this may be a surprise to you, but I'm actually thankful for Governor Northam, and I'll tell you why. It's because he showed the world what consistent abortion policy looks like. Morally, ethically, and physically, there is virtually no difference on whether we permit the taking of human life on the day before the due date, when the child is in the womb, or the moments after birth. The only thing separating those two situations is a few seconds and a birth canal. And he made that clear to the world in his comments. Governor Northam knew it, we know it. He's not mistaken. His depraved view of human life is actually quite consistent. So we elect Northam, then we hand him a pro-abortion legislature, right? So then we give him, with our election choices, a pro-choice House, a pro-choice Senate, and then in one bill, we see nearly all of the pro-life work that we have done get upended, really with virtually no debate. We literally got about 5 minutes to defend laws that were created in 1975 that have been good, sound public policy, and again, all in one bill. So, 50-year-old basically sound public policy means nothing now in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I was shocked, honestly, that anyone would consider repealing a law that at least ensures that if a woman is going to go get an abortion, she has a doctor. I was shocked that anyone would consider repealing a law that at least ensures a woman has full informed consent, including having the right to see their own ultrasound as they consider making these life-altering decisions and a life-ending decision for someone else. And I was shocked that anyone would consider repealing a law that helps prevent coerced abortion, by at least giving her these 24 hours for her to think about her decision rather than being brought into an abortion facility by the boyfriend or the pimp or whatever it might be with the pressure. I was shocked that anyone would consider repealing a law that ensures that if a woman makes a decision that you or I might not make, at least that it be in a center that meets the basic health and safety standards of not operating with blood on the on the tables and equipment that is not functioning. I mean, I can't tell you what we found in the inspection reports during the season where there were safety standards and the government went in and said, yes, we can actually check for this stuff. You would be horrified to know the environment that abortion is taking place in. For even, I mean, obviously we don't love the decision made, but to jeopardize 2 lives rather than just one. When we talk about a culture of life, we're talking about a culture of life for all. But to be honest, I'm still shocked that human life is allowed to be taken legally in this modern era. It should be shocking that we are still a country that allows this to take place. And even though every day more Americans are becoming more pro-life, if you look at the poll, there's no question that Americans are becoming more pro-life and recognizing the dignity of human life. Even though that's happening, it's still kind of been tough sledding on the life issue, both at the state law level, as we talked about, but also in the courts. Decades of work has been done by pro-lifers to overturn Roe and Casey and these terrible precedents. And then we get to year 2016, and we saw the Supreme Court hand down a terrible decision in Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstadt. This was a 5-3 majority opinion that turned entirely on political ideology rather than the court's own precedents, let alone an honest reading of our Constitution, which we know is sort of the problem in the first place and how we ever had a situation with Roe. But that decision, what it did is it essentially seemed to cement that the court, not the legislature, almost makes abortion law, because the courts now have to appear to, it looks like they're going to interpret all of these abortion laws as to whether women have access by what's the population of an area and how many centers are they, rather than actually looking at what we know is important for the safety of women. And that was a stunner for the pro-life community to see such a terrible decision come out of the Supreme Court in 2016. Then you fast forward to June of 2020, so we're just going back a year now. June Medical Services versus Russo was another case that was in front of the Supreme Court. At this point, this question was another safety question. So this was another decision around, can we at least put safety standards? And what Louisiana wanted to do in this case is they had passed a law that said doctors need to have admitting privileges. If you're going to be an abortionist, you're going to practice in some clinic somewhere, you at least need to be connected to a local hospital. So if something happens when a woman has an abortion, she has continuance of care. This is pretty common sense. And Louisiana simply said, this is going to be our law. And it goes to court. And pro-lifers, we were waiting with bated breath for this decision because at this point we now had Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. And so in our minds we're thinking, okay, we're almost there. And we thought this could be the beginning of the dismantling of Roe. But much to our disappointment, the court overturned this common sense Louisiana law. And it actually did it with Roberts, citing Hellerstedt, the one I mentioned in 2016, as precedent, even though he totally opposed, he was in the minority on Hellerstedt. So he didn't agree with the decision, but then he cites it as precedent in this 2020 decision. And so as a pro-life movement, I mean, this was a hard moment for us to imagine. So if you look at the totality of our state law as it's kind of been dismantled, and you look at these legal opinions like Hellerstedt and June Medical, you could think our work for all these years didn't really matter. I mean, you could honestly take an assessment and go, well, you're kind of where you started. I mean, it would be a reasonable, rational decision. And you as a donor, as a supporter, as an activist could say, it seems like it's about time to hang up the hat. You know, we've done it and we're just watching ourselves, you know, sort of spin circles. However, in sheer numbers, during that season where we had all these pro-life laws enacted, we at a minimum know that there were 52,000 lives saved during a couple of years because of the work that had been done. Those are small incremental efforts that happen over a long period of time, and sometimes you have setbacks. But at the Family Foundation, we think those 52,000 lives are worth it. We think one life is worth it. Right. And those lives were saved, and they were saved because pregnancy resource centers showed up to explain their work to legislators. That happened because post-abortive women showed up and testified about their own experience. Thousands of emails went into legislators to encourage them to vote pro-life. Election work was put through pro-lifers, just enough pro-lifers on these committees, on the House and the Senate, to actually get these laws passed. Pro-lifers came down when there were pro-life lobby days and we needed to put a volume of pro-life people in front of these legislators. Motorcyclists would come out for our Ride for the Unborn. And recently, thousands and thousands have been coming out to the annual March for Life. At the Family Foundation, those 52,000 lives matter. And we knew our efforts, your efforts, were of ultimate value, and we aren't discouraged. We simply keep moving forward. I have a regular guy who sends weekly, we'll call it hate mail, although it's not that hateful, but he's my opponent, he's my adversary. He's been sending weekly hate mail for literally over a decade now. And he recently, after our election, you know, we had some good things happen here in Virginia, which he didn't think was so great. He sent me this card, and it said, he wrote, "I draw inspiration from John Lewis," and he quoted, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, or even a month or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime." Little did my anonymous hate mailer know that these words inspire me too. Making abortion unthinkable is the work of a lifetime. We knew step one to rebuild the pro-life protections in our law was that in 2021, we had to elect a pro-life governor and a pro-life House of Delegates. And headed by our political arm, Britton's here, and Al, if you guys want to, you know, people love to know who you are. Headed by our, these guys and all their volunteers knocked 133,000 doors, and we got step one done. We know step two. Step two is to push for pro-life laws in the 2022 General Assembly session. And with Todd, where's Todd? Todd's over there. Todd, who heads up he's our Director of Government Relations, those bills are being filed, and we're basically putting plans together to put a really killer advocacy team beside Todd to go in there, and that team's got to get these bills through the committee, to the floor, to the governor to be signed. And navigating that legislative process, in order for that to be successful, it's only going to be successful if Candy Cushman, now she's somewhere around here, oh there she is, Candy's in the back, she's our VP of Grassroots Initiatives, and she has to secure engagement. You guys have to engage. Legislators know when organizations don't actually have people behind them, and they actually aren't voters, and they just walk in with, you know, here's the one fact. They have to actually hear from their own constituents, and that's what Candy is up to when she's trying to get you to engage. And to prepare for session, of course, we're asking everybody to be engaged with our Speak Up Virginia effort, and that's a multi-pronged thing, but you know, this is a grassroots mobilization effort to ensure that people have a voice in this battle for life. If you don't currently get our email alerts, for example, you won't know that actual moment when a bill is going to your legislator on the committee where we need you to email your legislator. So that's something where, you know, we've got to get you signed up so you're getting those. So it's an easy click. We know who your legislator is by your address. You don't have to have already had a relationship, although if you do, that's all the better. But we try to make it as easy as possible. If you're not already getting our text alerts, you know, this is where basically we text you when they get to debating these bills. It's all live, you know, everything is now, you can see, I mean, you could watch the entire General Assembly these days, give or take the backroom stuff, but you know, all the committees you could watch, but you'd have to sit there for forever, but that's our job. And when the important pro-life bills come, we text out, hey, right now, if you're available, click on this link and you'll get to see what your representatives are actually saying about human life. Are they actually, you sent them there to defend human life, are they actually doing that? And so it's a critical way to stay engaged and stay knowledgeable. And the other thing is, if you're not actually subscribed to our podcast, our Speak Up Virginia podcast, this is where every week we're doing short analysis. It's not going to 10, 20 minutes max. Analysis on what are the bills, and especially during session, that's going to be a critical way. You can just click on your drive to work and kind of hear, this is what's going on, and these are the obstacles. This is where we need your help. This is the discussion happening with legislators. So those are the ways that this is all part of that next step, right? Everything is a path. And so the last thing I want to caution us about is, of course, finally, we all know the next step is we want to see this Supreme Court overturn Roe in this very case. But I want to caution us that that's only the next step, because it's not the last step. And sometimes people think of, this is the moment, when this happens, everything else we're good. That's not true. Our work at the Family Foundation, should Roe be overturned, actually intensifies. The life or death question around the unborn then returns the control of the people of Virginia. So that's where I believe that you and I have to help our friends and our neighbors reject abortion in their hearts, right? It's not just about what happens at the Supreme Court. Now, I'll just kind of conclude by saying this. With faith, you know, like I had in the early years, well, that kind of faith is obviously a welcome reason to want abortion to be outlawed. Knowing that abortion is the taking of human life requires no faith at all. This is not just an issue for our people who share our faith view. Science and technology have fully verified what mothers have always known to be true. And as the Supreme Court is reviewing this Dobbs case, they know exactly what human development shows of a child who is 15 weeks in utero and beyond. And so do our fellow Virginians. They see the small hands and feet, they can hear the heartbeat, they have no excuse. The time has come, and we all have to be part of rebuilding the culture of life in our own Commonwealth.